and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. Here are the keywords that made headlines this week. South Korea is stepping up its diplomatic engagement as President Lee Jae-myung holds summit talks with leaders from Indonesia and France to strengthen bilateral ties. Consumer prices in South Korea rose above 2% in March as soaring global oil prices pushed up energy costs. With more than 200,000 fans turning out on opening weekend, South Korea's baseball season is off to an exciting start in the KBO League. The government has finalized an extra budget aimed at cushioning the economic fallout from the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Our political correspondent Moon In-yeon reports.
The government has approved a supplementary budget with the bulk of spending aimed at cushioning the economic shock from the escalating Middle East crisis, particularly surging global oil prices. Totaling 26.2 trillion won, around $17 billion. At the center of the plan is direct support to households grappling with higher energy costs. More than $3 billion has been set aside for cash handouts, with roughly 35.8 million people, or the bottom 70% of income earners, set to receive between $65 and $390 each, depending on their income and where they live. In parallel, the government is allocating more than $3 billion to ease energy-related expenses more broadly. This includes support for a fuel price cap system, subsidies to offset rising transportation and fuel costs, and expanded benefits for energy voucher recipients. Additional temporary subsidies will also be provided to farmers and fishers facing higher fuel bills. Officials say these measures are designed to counter what's being described as a triple shock of high inflation, high interest rates, and a weak currency, all exacerbated by oil prices soaring well above $100 per barrel. Beyond the immediate Middle East-related response, the budget also includes wider economic support. About $1.8 billion will go towards stabilizing livelihoods, such as expanded assistance for small business owners struggling with rising costs. Another $1.7 billion portion is earmarked for minimizing industrial damage and securing supply chains for companies facing higher import costs and disruptions in key materials like naphtha. Local governments will receive a significant boost as well to strengthen regional finances and education funding. Additional investments include funding for cultural and creative industries, jobs for young people and startups, and support for renewable energy transitions. The government expects the extra spending to lift economic growth by 0.2 percentage points and says the budget will be financed without issuing new debt, using surplus tax revenue driven largely by a strong semiconductor sector. Once the proposal is submitted to the National Assembly, lawmakers will review the bill with the goal of passing it by April 10th. Moon In-yeon, ArirangNews.
President Lee Jae-myung on Wednesday hosted his Indonesian counterpart, upgrading their bilateral partnership to a higher level. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
The summit began with a grand welcome, a traditional honor guard for the state guests. President Lee Jae-myung hosted his Indonesian counterpart, Prabowo Subianto, on Wednesday at the Blue House, where they agreed to upgrade bilateral ties to a special comprehensive strategic partnership.
이번 대통령님의 국빈 방한을 계기로 양국 관계를 대한민국에서는 유일한 특별 포괄적 전략 동반자 관계로 격상하는 역사적인 결실을 맺게 되었습니다. 참으로
My state visit here comes at a situation where the world is full of uncertainty and danger. So this makes relationship between countries like Indonesia and Korea more important.
The talks yielded key deliverables as the importance of the bilateral cooperation was highlighted amid the global energy crunch due to the conflict in the Middle East.
우리는 인도네시아가 LNG와 석탄 등 주요 에너지원의 안정적 역할을 해주는 데 대해서 무척 든든하게 생각하고 있습니다. 이번 위기가 양국 경제와 국민의 삶에 미칠 영향이 최소화되도록 에너지의 안정적 공급 및 자원 안보 관련 양국 간의 협력을 확대해 나갈 필요성이 매우 큽니다.
You have achieved tremendous strides in your development. Your industry and your science and technology is very advanced. We have a lot of resources. We have a big market. We can complement each other.
A host of MOUs were exchanged, including cooperation on the economy, critical minerals, clean energy, and AI for health. South Korea and Indonesia also plan to bolster their defense industry cooperation based upon their joint development of the KF-21 fighter jet. The leaders also addressed their global contribution as middle powers. Later in the day, the Indonesian leader was hosted for a state lunch, along with key business leaders, building a personal bond and friendship. President Lee presented his Indonesian counterpart with the nation's highest order, the Grand Order of Mugunghwa. The top-level talks come amid what the president calls a complex poly-crisis on a global level. On Friday, President Lee will host his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron, at the Blue House. Yoon Jung-min, ArirangNews.
French President Emmanuel Macron arrived in South Korea on Thursday for a two-day state visit, marking the first visit by a French president in 11 years, where he met with President Lee Jae-myung to discuss a wide range of issues, from economic cooperation to security and cultural ties.
The French first couple was given a red carpet welcome by their South Korean counterparts at the Blue House. President Lee Jae-myung and French President Emmanuel Macron on Friday agreed to upgrade the two countries' ties to a global strategic partnership.
양국 관계가 글로벌 전략적 동반자 관계로 격상되었다는 점에서 이번 방한은 더욱 의미 있는 이정표로 남게 될 것입니다.
On the occasion of celebrating 140 years of our diplomatic ties, I believe it's a good chance to elevate the partnership between South Korea and France.
South Korea and France plan to strengthen their partnership in trade and investment, as well as critical minerals, AI, semiconductors, and nuclear energy.
오늘 체결되는 대한민국 한수원과 프랑스 기업 오라노, 프라마톰 간 양해각서는 우리 원전의 원료를 안정적으로 공급하는 것은 물론 글로벌 원자력 시장에 공동 진출할 기반을 마련할 수 있을 것입니다.
As for bilateral trade volume in 2025, it's been doubled compared to a decade ago. It's been stimulated by the free trade agreement between the EU and Korea. I also plan to meet Korean businesses and discuss their investment plans in France.
The conflict in the Middle East and its impact on global energy and economies were high on the agenda.
원자력 및 해상 풍력 분야의 협력을 확대하여 에너지 안보를 강화하는 한편으로 호르무즈 해협 내 안전한 해상 수송로 확보를 위해 협력하겠다는 의지도 확인하였습니다.
As for the Middle East crisis and the conditions to ease the conflict, we need to make sure these issues are clearly resolved. We also need to ensure the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
They also addressed efforts to resume dialogue with North Korea and achieving peace on the Korean peninsula. France is a permanent UN Security Council member and this year's host of the G7 summit. Their cooperation will also extend to cultural and people-to-people exchanges, including expanding a working holiday program. The French president invited President Lee to this year's G7 summit. This comes as Seoul sees a growing need to strengthen strategic communication with Paris amid global uncertainties. Yoon Jung-min, ArirangNews.
Meanwhile, the economic fallout from the Middle East conflict is hitting closer to home than expected, fueling panic buying and supply concerns over everyday goods. Our Kim Ji-young shows us how.
At a large supermarket in Seoul, signs reading "Standard garbage bags sold out" are posted across checkout counters. Surging oil and raw material prices amid the Middle East conflict have raised concerns over the supply of naphtha, driving panic buying. In South Korea, household waste is disposed of officially designated garbage bags. Usually garbage bags are available at the checkout, but today, they're all gone. The sudden sellout is catching many customers by surprise.
I didn't bring a shopping bag, and I'm surprised the garbage bags are sold out. They were available just a few days ago, so I was planning to buy some.
Though this is not a full shortage but a temporary supply strain driven by demand, consumer anxiety is evident in the data. Sales of designated garbage bags at a major supermarket chain rose nearly 4 times on year over the past week. As of last Friday, around 80 stores had introduced purchase limits per customer. Beyond garbage bags, concerns are mounting over possible shortages of disposable packaging, including containers made from naphtha-based materials. Rising costs are also putting added pressure on the food service industry.
We offer takeout, so we rely on packaging containers, but rising prices are making them harder to find. If the conflict continues, supplies could tighten further, so I'm worried.
Lee's situation reflects a wider struggle among small business owners.
We estimate packaging prices have risen by roughly 20 to 30%. Small business owners are already under strain from weak domestic demand, and their burden is getting heavier.
Global naphtha prices climbed to over $141 per barrel as of Monday, nearly doubling in just a month from pre-war levels. South Korea relies on imports for about half of its naphtha demand, with more than 70% sourced from the Middle East. The impact is expected to spread across a wide range of daily use items.
Many of the affected everyday goods are produced by small businesses that lack large raw material reserves, causing supplies to run out quickly. Damage to oil and gas facilities in the Middle East will take time to repair, so even if the conflict ends now, the impact is likely to persist for a considerable period.
As naphtha is widely used in everyday chemical products, the uncertainty is spreading into unexpected corners of daily life. Kim Junong, 아리랑뉴스.
Surging global oil prices are fueling inflation in South Korea, with consumer prices rising 2.2% in March, driven largely by petroleum costs. Let's take a closer look at what's behind the increase.
South Korea's consumer price growth accelerated to 2.2% in March, driven almost entirely by a massive spike in global oil prices. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Thursday, the overall inflation rate was heavily pressured by the energy sector. Petroleum product prices surged 9.9% from a year ago, marking the fastest rise since October 2022, when oil prices rose during the war in Ukraine.
The biggest factor is the rise in global oil prices due to the situation in the Middle East. Dubai crude soared to $128 in March from $68.04 the month before. This seems to have significantly driven up our domestic fuel costs.
This near 10% jump in petroleum prices marks a sharp reversal from the previous month. In February, fuel prices had actually declined by 2.4% on year. But with food prices going up, the overall index was around the same level at 2.0%. Now, for this month, breaking down the energy shock, the impact was most severe in diesel. Diesel prices jumped 17% due to its broad use across industrial, transport, and military sectors, while gasoline rose 8%. Despite this severe external shock, the headline inflation rate was kept from spiraling further. The government's price ceilings on fuel products effectively mitigated the spike, keeping South Korea's figures lower than those of other major economies. The energy price surge was also offset by a decline in food costs, a reversal of the factors from the previous month. Overall, agricultural, livestock, and fishery prices fell 0.6%. The fresh food index saw a steeper drop of 6.6% as warmer spring weather boosted crop production. Additionally, processed food inflation slowed following factory price cuts for staple ingredients like flour and sugar. Looking ahead, the ministry warns that upward pressure is expected to persist in April as higher energy costs will inevitably reflect in international airfare and imported agricultural goods. Kim Do-yeon, 아리랑뉴스.
And now our economics correspondent Kim Do-yeon joins us in the studio to discuss this further. Welcome, Do-yeon.
Good to be here.
Right, so you mentioned earlier that the price hike of petroleum products was contained by the government's price cap. So how is Korea faring compared to other nations?
Right, Sujin, the Ministry of Data and Statistics emphasized that the domestic fuel price surge was contained thanks to the government's price ceiling, like we talked about, which is currently capped at 1,934 won per liter for gasoline when it's being transferred to retailers by the refiners.
While we are the first to release detailed March figures, looking broadly, the margin of increase is significantly slower compared to countries like the U.S. or Japan. This effect appears to be largely due to the implementation of the price ceiling.
To be specific, the U.S. national average for regular gasoline just topped $4 a gallon for the first time in nearly 4 years, according to AAA, jumping over $8 per gallon since the conflict began. U.S. diesel has also surged by roughly $1.70. Again, officials confirm the domestic price ceilings prevented a similar steep spike here.
I see, and the Middle East conflict is obviously on everyone's mind right now. So will we see global oil prices stabilizing anytime soon?
Well, the outlook looks grim. Now, a new report by the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, or KIEP, concludes that oil prices will not return to pre-war levels under any foreseeable scenario.
For example, even in an early ceasefire scenario, it would be $90 by the fourth quarter of 2027. The biggest reason is that supply cannot be rapidly increased. Even if the U.S. eases sanctions on Russia or tries to increase its own production, practically, it is difficult to sharply increase output in a short period.
If the current blockade of the Strait of Hormuz continues, prices could stabilize at a much higher $117. Repairing damaged Middle Eastern energy facilities will take 3 to 5 years. And even if the strait reopens, potential Iranian transit fees will likely be passed down to consumers.
That does sound quite concerning. So what will prices look like in April and beyond? And are there any other areas other than airfare and groceries that will be impacted?
It goes much deeper. Now, as I said before, while consumers will feel the immediate pinch in airfares and imported food this month, a massive crisis is brewing in our core industries. The conflict has severely disrupted the supply of naphtha and LNG. Following the attack on Qatar's gas complex, global naphtha prices have skyrocketed by nearly 50%. South Korea relies on the Middle East for over 34% of its naphtha, the absolute backbone of the nation's petrochemical industry. Furthermore, Qatar is a major producer of helium, a critical component for semiconductor manufacturing. This energy shock is transforming into a severe supply chain crisis for the nation's biggest export players.
All right, thank you so much for coming in today, Toyon.
Anytime, Sujin.
North Korea has rebuked the most recent UN resolution on its human rights abuses, referring to it as a political provocation. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-young reports.
North Korea strongly condemned the UN's recent adoption of a human rights resolution against the regime, calling it a grave political provocation against the dignity and sovereignty of its own state. This was in a statement from the regime's foreign ministry spokesperson and delivered by the Korean Central News Agency on Thursday. The statement argued that the UN human rights review system specifically targeting individual states was a hostile act that violates the UN Charter's principles of sovereign equality and non-interference in internal affairs. The ministry criticized the long-term practice of adopting such resolutions against North Korea for over 20 years, saying this shows the regrettable state of the UN human rights stage that has been extremely tainted by politicization, selectivity, and double standards. It added that the most urgent task for the UN Human Rights Council today should be investigating and holding accountable hegemonic powers for what it called large-scale crimes against humanity, mentioning tragic incidents of children killed in large numbers, apparently referring to a recent U.S. attack that led to at least 175 students and teachers' deaths in an elementary school in Iran. The ministry warned that countries committing such malicious acts, which also joined in defaming the regime, would certainly have to pay for their actions. This followed the UN Human Rights Council's adoption of the resolution by consensus on March 30th, with a total of 50 countries, including South Korea, co-sponsoring the resolution.
North Korea treats human rights as an issue of sovereignty and non-interference. So while it didn't directly mention South Korea's co-sponsorship, the statement likely carries an implicit criticism.
This marked the 24th consecutive year since 2003 that a resolution on North Korean human rights has been adopted. Kim Bo-kyung, ArirangNews.
And fresh off the historic Oscar wins, the team behind K-pop Demon Hunters is already gearing up for a sequel, raising expectations for an even bigger global spotlight on Korean culture. Our culture correspondent Park Gun-woo tells us more.
Fresh off their Oscar triumphs, the team returns to Korea with multiple golden statuettes as expectations soar following the official announcement of a sequel. Director Ma Gi-gang says she's currently working on the storyline, now in early development, while keeping details to a minimum and avoiding spoilers.
My fellow director Chris and I will be making the kind of movie we'd want to see, as we did the first time. So, stay tuned. It will be even more eventful, at an even greater scale. As for the music, I still want to showcase Korean trot alongside heavy metal.
The Koreanness is the soul of the movie on every level. Combination of really grounding it in the culture, but also breaking rules everywhere. I think we'll try to do that. And in my experience of Korean culture and Korean people is that they've been through a lot. And there's a pride and a strength and a sense of unity that I think is really moving. And
Director Ma Gi-gang also recalled the moment she captured the first ever Best Animated Feature Oscar for a filmmaker of Korean heritage.
I have felt this as a Korean myself, not feeling completely Korean. And now that we have reached this kind of a global market, especially in entertainment, I do think a lot of us, like myself and EJ, who kind of are skirting both cultures, we are the ones who will be bridging that gap between cultures, whether it's Korean or not.
The film's success was shared by its music team as well, including singer-songwriter EJ, who performed at the 98th Academy Awards after collecting an Oscar.
I never imagined it would become so globally viral, especially since I was made fun of for loving K-pop when I was younger. At the Oscars, seeing all the filmmakers singing along while holding light sticks as we performed with traditional Korean music, including pansori, made me so proud that I burst into tears.
With the music team also showing positivity over featuring more Korean-style music, including trot, expectations are higher than ever. And with that in mind, K-pop Demon Hunters 2 is set to be released around 2029 to once again spotlight K-culture on the global stage. Park Gun-woo, ArirangNews.
Baseball fever is back in full swing in South Korea as packed stadiums and roaring crowds signal a strong start to the new KBO season. Our Chung Hye-rim was at one stadium.
This is the Jamsil Sports Complex in Seoul, packed with fans. On Tuesday evening, the Shinhan Seoul KBO League saw the LG Twins take on the Kia Tigers, with baseball fever returning to the capital. Much of this excitement stems from Korea's recent success in the World Baseball Classic, where the team advanced to the quarterfinals for the first time in 17 years.
The energy from the fans at the stadium was amazing. It made the game so much more exciting to play. I'm incredibly thankful for the overwhelming support we've received, both on and off the field. Our goal is, of course, back-to-back championships. We're a team that knows how to find its momentum, so I'm staying focused.
Outside the diamond, a festival atmosphere was in full swing before the game. Fans grabbed their favorite stadium snacks and showed off their love for their team in colorful uniforms.
I miss cheering at the baseball stadium because it's my favorite part of watching the games.
I'm very excited for all the cheering, and I really want to see if there's going to be some good games, like some good hits as well.
As the game began, the stadium turned into a sea of emotion as fans cheered and chanted along to the beat of player songs and also shared both the joy of a hit and the disappointment of an out. Raw passion and love of baseball were in the air, with fans saying they had missed this experience.
The hardest part was definitely the long wait after last season ended. But now that it's finally back, being here in this beautiful weather with my friends feels great.
I hope people realize the owner of Jamshir Stadium is the LG Twins.
The sheer volume of fans returning to the stands signals a golden age for the league. That fever isn't just limited to Jamshir. Over 211,000 fans packed stadiums nationwide during the opening weekend, marking the third highest attendance for an opening series in KBO history. Can you hear the roar? After another sellout opening weekend, Korea's most loved sport is officially back. Now, all eyes on whether this momentum can carry the KBO to a historic 13 million fans. 정혜림, 아리랑뉴스. That brings us to the end of Weekly News Highlights. Thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of your weekend.